Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, September 16th, 2022. The insanity of D.C. thinking. We've often wondered why people who appear to be reasonably intelligent when you meet them can do some insanely crazy things, yet still insist that they're acting in a logical and sane manner. Now, some of the recent actions taken by our leaders have provided some insight into understanding what's really happening. An article appeared in The Hill that contained these points. Interest rates are rising. Inflation is lingering at 4-decade highs, the economy appears to be slowing, and experts fear a recession is on the way. But Americans are still quitting their jobs at near-record rates in the face of growing economic uncertainty. The percentage of American workers who quit their jobs set a record earlier this year and has dropped only slightly since then. After reaching 2.9% this spring, the quits rate dropped to 2.7% in July, according to data released by the Labor Department. Ann Elizabeth Kunkel, an economist at Indeed Hiring Lab, said, quoting here, "Despite recent declines, job openings still outnumber unemployed workers by a sizable margin, illustrating just how tight the labor market remains. On the flip side, inflation continues to take a bite out of workers' paychecks." She continued, noting that only 46% of workers saw wage gains that outpaced inflation. Conkle pointed out that the number of Indeed users seeking jobs with a $20 per hour wage rose above those seeking $15 an hour in June of 2022, and the number of job seekers looking for $25 an hour is up 122% over the past 12 months. There were roughly 2 open jobs for every unemployed American, according to Labor Department data, giving job seekers ample opportunity to find new jobs with better pay or working conditions. Consumer spending is well above pre-pandemic levels, but the workforce is still smaller than it was before COVID. Consequently, businesses are scrambling to find enough workers to keep up. Hospitality companies tell us that what was once a one-strike-you're-out rule for employees who fail to show up at work without notice is more like a 10-strikes-you're-out rule. They simply can't afford to fire workers because they can't afford to replace them, said Julia Pollack, chief economist at ZipRecruiter. Now in D.C., where many believe in the gospel of more regulation and more labor union power, this data is greeted with unease and even disappointment. Where else but in D.C. could you have cries of dismay when workers, without the aid of government or unions, demand and get higher pay, more flexible hours, the ability to work remotely, and better benefits? Where else but in D.C. do you hear cheers when unemployment goes up, wages stop increasing, gas prices increase, mortgage interest rates increase and home purchases decline, and car loan interest rates increase? Wait, you say, that's insane. Yeah, but that's the prevailing way of viewing things in D.C. In conclusion, here's what D.C. and their minions fear that the great unwashed will learn. That D.C.'s massive spending has fueled inflation because it required the Federal Reserve to print massive amounts of money to fund their spending. Rather than take responsibility for their actions, the D.C. and Federal Reserve solution is simply to punish the rest of us. If many of us lose our jobs, we'll not be able to spend as much, so theoretically, inflation will go down. If more people lose their jobs, they'll be more dependent on D.C. for their survival. If cars are more expensive, or gas is more expensive, or loan interest rates rise, then we can't make purchases, and this will result in, theoretically anyway, a reduction in the inflation rate. And as consumer demand decreases, businesses will have to slow production, and this means fewer workers are needed. Notice a pattern here? It's not their fault, but our fault, so we have to be punished. Now, never lose sight of 2 inconvenient truths. The DC elites never participate in the pain they cause for others. They also never lose their jobs, and they never lose their benefits. Now, this is the same insane logic that justifies keeping the income payroll tax system that only benefits them and not the rest of us. To D.C., it's perfectly fine if the income payroll tax system grows the economy at a much slower rate than the fair tax would. It rewards imports and penalizes U.S. businesses, eliminates well-paying U.S. jobs, requires a Gestapo-like IRS to enforce it, takes money from our paychecks before we even get them, and requires complicated forms and unnecessary receipts and record keeping. The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with the fair tax. The fair tax will allow Americans to take back control over their government and their lives. Join us and take back control of our country and our lives, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. We should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. So what can each of us do? We can write letters and make calls to our elected representatives and attend Zoom town hall meetings demanding that if they really want to allow Americans to take back control, the first step is to eliminate the income payroll tax system and enact the fair tax. Take back control. Help us pass the fair tax. The IRS will be gone and we'll pay our taxes when we make purchases. We, not the ruling class and their minions in D.C., will decide how much federal tax we pay, and we'll know how much tax we're paying because taxes will no longer be hidden from us. They'll be clearly shown on every retail receipt. If you have friends who don't know about the fair tax, send them to FAIRtax.org. Have them watch the whiteboards under how it works, and if they agree, ask them to please join us. Then, contact your members of Congress and the President and demand that Congress pass the fair tax, the only truly fair tax.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax, and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at FAIRtax.org.